If you're an HR professional who works hard to fill roles within your company, keep employees engaged, and build company culture, welcome to America Back to Work, where dreams only work if we do. We'll share wide-ranging issues surrounding pre-employment background screening, HR topics such as recruiting, hiring, labor trends, and company culture, as well as broader HR-influenced business topics such as customer experience, service level excellence, and protecting what matters through best practices in prevention, protection, and corporate security. America Back to Work is brought to you by S2 Verify. Here's your host, Arnette Heintze.
Welcome to America Back to Work, brought to you by S2 Verify, where our purpose is to help you hire with confidence and manage insider risk. I'm your host, Arnette Heintze. Thank you for joining. Today, our guest is Amanda Haddaway. Amanda is the Managing Director of HR Answerbox, where she specializes in conducting workplace investigations, solving complex employee relations issues, and serving as an advisor and trainer for small business owners and leaders. Amanda, thank you so much for joining me today. Would you, as we get into our conversation, would you mind sharing a little bit more about your background, your career, and what led you to specializing in employee relations?
Yes, I'd love to. Thanks so much for having me on the show. So, like many HR professionals, I actually got into HR accidentally. I interned for a federal government contractor when I was in college, and when it got to be my senior year, they invited me to interview with them for a full-time position. And I was hired as a junior analyst, which in the government contracting space is a fancy title for a report writer. And so I started on a project supporting military healthcare, the TRICARE program, and worked on that for about a month when my project manager came to me and said, unfortunately, our project has lost its funding. And that meant that I needed to find another opportunity within the organization. And so I interviewed internally for a junior recruiter position, and the rest is history. I'm now 24 years into my career in HR and over 7 years in business for myself with HR Answerbox.
Well, that's just fabulous. So I know, employee relations is a really broad topic and a lot of people interpret it differently. But what do you see about successful companies and how they define and approach this topic?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is the companies that are doing this really well are focused on the entire employee experience and building a productive and effective workplace culture. So they're taking care of their employees. They're growing and developing their talent. They make sure that there's regular feedback. There are training opportunities. There are incentives to employees to stay with the company, meaning that they're building careers internally. And the companies are really looking at regular levels of engagement and really focusing on how to retain their employees over a period of time, especially in the current job market where there are so many open opportunities.
Well, I know you and your team step in with organizations when things start to break down, complexity comes in. What type of issues do you find yourself getting pulled into the most? Can you kind of qualify that for us?
So we get pulled into a little bit of everything from basic disputes or disagreements between managers and employees, or two employees who are coworkers and can't get along, to more serious situations that involve full-on workplace investigations around allegations of sexual harassment, employee discrimination, and things like that.
As an organization is, dealing with these various employee relations issues, what are some of the risks if a company chooses to ignore? Which a lot of times people want to put their head in the sand and just kind of hope it goes away. And we all know it really never does go away. So tell us about the risk that you see come up in this category.
It's funny that you said the head in the sand approach because that's how I refer to it as well. And what we know is that that approach is not at all effective and not recommended for our clients, but we do see it happening sometimes. And so the companies that choose to ignore these issues can be faced with a ton of liabilities and risks to their organization. On the most severe side, they could be faced with very expensive and costly lawsuits. They may be given fines from regulatory agencies, and they could also have an increased risk of turnover. So, losing key employees who just don't want to be a part of a workplace culture or an environment that doesn't do anything about the challenges in the workplace. And then additionally, the poor image in the marketplace, everything from a negative Glassdoor review to challenges with recruiting people because candidates are looking at those types of reviews as well.
Yeah, I know employee relation problems don't just come up in isolation. It's not like your one-off situation and, oh, where did this come from? It's typically an indication that there's something systemic in the organization. Can you kind of help us work through that?
It all boils down to workplace culture. And so the companies that have been really clear and intentional in figuring out their mission, their vision, their values, their purpose, and their goals are the ones who are doing a good job with employee relations. The ones that are leaving workplace culture to chance are allowing these risks to pop up. And, again, if they're not being dealt with in a timely manner, then those risks continue to snowball and can be really catastrophic to an organization.
In the area of red flags that you might provide as a little bit of a framework or an awareness for our HR professionals who are out there listening, can you offer some insight in that?
Some of the red flags that come up right off the top of my head are turnover and absenteeism. So if you are seeing a spike in people leaving your organization and or you're seeing an increase in people who are calling out on a more regular and frequent basis, then you think that they're actually sick or, needing to take time off. Those could be key indicators that you have a problem within your workplace culture. Additionally, if you're doing any type of engagement surveys and you see that the levels of disengagement are going up, and certainly lower levels of productivity could be indicators that there's a problem.
So you mentioned culture a couple of times here. So tell me how, if you see an organization that the issue is around culture, how do you work with the company in this area?
That's a great question. And it's not an overnight fix. This is something that takes time and takes research and really intentional action to correct a culture problem. We've actually developed a tool called the Culture Canvas, and this takes leaders and stakeholders through an interactive, facilitated process to better understand where their culture is now and where there are areas that perhaps need improvement. And so we talk to them about things like mission, vision, values, purpose. And then we get a little more granular where we talk about all the very aspects of the employee life cycle. So from how a candidate approaches the organization when they first apply to how they're recruited, how they're oriented and onboarded in the company, and then what happens during that life cycle of being an employee to the point that they ultimately leave the organization. And there are a lot of touch points that are in there that we work with companies on to make sure that the employee experience is a good one.
I think I'm a little like you. I'm a huge champion of vision, mission, purpose, value proposition. But one of the more prominent areas, I believe, is core values and beliefs and how well an organization identifies those. And frankly, when I see a company that throws 10 core values and beliefs, I kind of go, well, that's a little much. What are the top 3 or 4 that you can hone in on and truly adopt in the organization so everybody appreciates that? What's your thoughts on that? Are you helping organizations refine core values and beliefs and helping them identify the best ways to promote those?
We are. So a lot of times those conversations start at the top leadership levels. And if we have the opportunity to work with the founders of the company to really understand why they went into business in the first place, that helps defining that value proposition and what's important to them. And then in larger companies, or in the case of an organization where the founder is no longer involved, we may do some surveys, some focus groups, some facilitated discussions to hone in on those. Some of the values that we see most frequently have to do around customer service and really making sure that the people that our organizations are serving are doing the best that they can. And we went through this process in HR Answerbox, and one of the core values for us is responsiveness. So we've conducted a survey every year, and every single year, the top thing that our customers say about why they like working with us is that we respond to them. And that's kind of important in an HR consultant role, that we are responsive and available when they need us. And so it's amazing to me that there are a lot of consulting agencies out there that aren't responsive or aren't as responsive. And that's something that's always highlighted.
For all of us that have some responsibilities with HR, we know that, people are at the heart of both the problem and the solution. So if you're giving some suggestions to the HR professionals out there joining us today, what are some of the problematic issues or problematic employees? I hate to categorize people like that, but there are problematic employees. What are some of those traits that you come across?
So I would say in the workplace investigations that we do that are a little less serious than the ones around harassment and discrimination, but are more in some type of interpersonal conflict, at the core root base of those disagreements, it almost always is a communication issue. And so people aren't communicating well or effectively with each other. And so communication skills would probably be the main thing that I would really focus on. And then kind of an offshoot of that would be conflict resolution and some conversations around change management as well. Change is often really hard for people, and some of these conflicts flare up due to changes that are happening within an organization.
So let's take a look at the more positive side of that question that I just presented. And if you see employees or leaders that handle conflict resolution, employee relations really well, what stands out there? What are some of the characteristics that you would point to?
Taking care of their people. So they're looking at benefits and compensation and really taking a broad approach to that, and thinking about work-life balance and work-life blending, as well as mental health and wellness components to that. They're also focused on what can we do to make this a good employee experience? What can we do to retain our people? And one of the questions that I sometimes say to my clients is, what gets your employees out of bed in the morning? Because when you understand what motivates the individual employees, that's half the battle, right? If you can answer that question, it allows you to tailor your programs and to better care for your employees and to provide what they need and what they want in a workplace.
So as we look at the spectrum and we're looking for quantifiable results, what kind of return on investment can companies expect? If they step into and invest in all things employee relations?
I love data. And so looking at the numbers around how long people have been at the company. So looking at your retention rates, if you see that you are hiring people and you have this kind of revolving door where people are only staying 6 months at a time, that's a sign that you need to do something within your culture. Also, too, you're finding that it's easier to recruit because you have this value proposition that's out in the marketplace. And so people are aware of your organization and know that you're an employer of choice. And so to put the return on investment and put a hard number on that, what we know is that it's always less expensive to retain an employee than to re-recruit for that same position over and over. There are a number of data points that are out there, but some estimates say that it takes 2 times what the annual salary would be for a person in re-recruitment and retraining costs. And so that's money that's coming off of your bottom line every single time you lose a person and have to refill a position.
So at HR Answerbox, when a firm reaches out to you, a potential new client, do you find yourself getting engaged with the employees in mass? I mean, are you often called to train or educate or prepare the employee work group?
So it depends. A couple of our services do include interaction with employees. So for some of our clients, we serve in an ombudsperson role, meaning that if a company has an HR department or has a leadership team, but they want to provide another avenue for employees to reach out to someone external to the company and talk through employee relations issues or challenges, they can contact us. So in that capacity, we get involved with employees. We also do a lot of training. The majority of the training that we do is management training, but we're working a lot of times with those frontline leaders. So your entry level managers who perhaps haven't received any formal management training in the past. The typical case is they were an individual contributor and they did a good job in their role. And so the company says, congratulations, we're promoting you. You now have a team. Good luck. And they don't always provide them with a lot of training right off the bat. And so that's where we come in and give them the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be an effective people leader.
So in the area of workplace investigations, is your firm called on much to look in those complex issues? And then how do you typically maneuver and approach investigations that are in the workplace?
So a number of years ago, I actually went back to school and obtained a master's degree in jurisprudence from Tulane University Law School. And so only about 6% of HR practitioners have formal legal training. And because of that, we have been really successful in partnering with a number of law firms. The attorneys really like the fact that I've had some formal training in labor and employment law, and that makes us an effective partner to them. And so in the investigations that we do, we sometimes are hired directly by the law firm to protect attorney-client privilege, and sometimes we're hired directly by the employer, depending on the situation. But our first step is to just understand what situation is going on and try to collect as much information as possible and then determine the scope. And I always like to be overly inclusive in my interview process. So I talk to my clients about who are the people in the organization that could have observed the situation or may have relevant information. And sometimes those investigations end up taking several weeks, even several months to really do a thorough job of investigating what happened and then providing a summary report back to the client with some recommendations of how to avoid this situation going forward.
Well, you mentioned Tulane University, and that's a part of the South that's very near and dear to me since I grew up in Baton Rouge and actually lived in New Orleans in the early 80s. So I'm sure you enjoyed your time down there.
It's a beautiful campus. I actually did most of my studies remotely, but I've had an opportunity to be on campus a number of times.
Yeah. Well, given your law background, I'm not sure this question is really a fair one since you're more than likely squeaky clean. But before we sign off today, I want to ask you a question that I ask all our guests. And that is, if S2 Verify were to conduct a background check on you, would there be any surprises?
Well, sorry to disappoint, but I think the last time I received a speeding ticket, and I don't want to jinx myself, but I think it was probably like 16 or 17 years ago. And usually background checks only go back about 7. So I don't think you would see anything on there.
There you go.
Maybe run it. You have my permission.
Well, that's great. Well, Amanda, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and giving our audience some insights into this really critical area. Where can our audience connect with you and HR Answerbox? What's the best locations?
We have business pages on both Facebook and LinkedIn, as well as our websites, hranswerbox.com, and our secondary website, virtualhrservice.com.
That's fabulous. And before we sign off, I do have a minute I'd like to spend with my partners, Bill and Jim at S2 Verify. Let me take us to an area relating to, our organization. And over the last, I think, 14 years, Bill, from your point of view, where you said, what's your greatest achievement? What's our greatest milestone as a company that we have achieved over these 14 years?
Well, I think to Jim's point, not only have we built a great culture, our people love working here, but for me, the biggest one is achieving the Inc. 500, where we were at 193 and number 3 in human resources, which is quite an achievement if you think of all millions of businesses out there. And so that was just something I've always aspired to. And so to be able to be recognized in that venue was just extremely exciting for me.
Yeah. Jim, how about you?
Certainly, I agree with Billy on the Inc. award. That was just, as you're a growing company, being recognized in that space is a big deal. I would suggest that also in 2014, receiving our first accreditation, which was a ridiculous amount of work. And at that time, S2 Verify, there weren't a lot of places for Billy and I to handle. So you get the accreditation by the two of us doing that work that's required and the structure and setting it up and doing all those things. And the last one was our first acquisition of Yale.
Yeah.
Growing the company to a point where we could even get in a position to do that. Really big deal. So yeah, those 3 are really important milestones.
For our audience, please tune in next week when we talk about how to design and recruit your HR dream team with Vanessa Parton. She's the Chief Human Resources Officer of the Red Gray Companies. And we'll see you then. And it goes without saying, let's get America back to work, because dreams only work if we do. Amanda, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
If you want to stay abreast of HR recruiting and hiring trends, tips, and tools, make sure you subscribe to America Back to Work. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating and a review.